My name is Tom Vaughan. I am from Houston, Texas. I am a professional screenwriter and teacher. I've been writing about 28 years professionally, and I have been teaching the subject for almost as long. I was an actor. I have always loved movies, always loved the arts, and started studying acting pretty seriously at about 15 years old, turning 16. And was in a pretty serious high school drama program, which sounds ridiculous, but it actually was, some of the best introductions to acting, one could have. Then I went to the University of Houston as an actor, and then at some point I was discouraged because I wasn't getting the leading man roles. Being frustrated, not getting the Brad Pitt roles, I decided to start writing a little bit on the side. Ended up really loving that, seeing it, writing plays, really took in all of my interest, all of my background, my love of acting, my love of story, my love of history, philosophy, politics. I was able to put all of that into one single endeavor. At some point, I had a self-produced play that a review ended up at the desk of an agent in LA. He called me up, started an introduction then, and I realized that career-wise, I wanted to make some money. I wanted to have a career, and started writing screenplays. And eventually, probably within a couple years after that, started doing it professionally. Sure, a lot of mentors, had a lot of great acting teachers who I did not realize at the time how much affected my writing. Carolyn Boone here at the University of Houston was a mentor for me. Jose Quintero. Didn't understand how much Jose affected my writing until years and years later. But that was he was a huge influence on me. Edward Albee was my playwriting teacher. Edward was instrumental in giving me confidence as a writer. And then when I started writing professionally, I had producers come in and mentor me. Jim Wida was the initial producer that I worked with, who kind of taught me a lot. Joel Fields was a producer who mentored me. So I consider myself self-taught because of all the work I went into teaching myself, but it was always that self-teaching got me to a point where there was a mentor, and then that mentor accelerated everything else even further. And then I would do some self-teaching until I got to a mentor, then the mentor would accelerate me further. I was very fortunate because when I moved to LA, I had an agent, I had a producer, I had a project to work on. So I never had to have the traditional day job in LA. My day jobs of like working at the video store, working at a deli, working at a movie theater, those were all in Texas. So, but when I moved to LA, I've only ever been a writer and a teacher in LA. So I was very fortunate there. And it allowed me to, avoid so many of the pitfalls of moving out to LA, which is like spending 50 hours a week just trying to pay rent and then trying to muster the energy to write, but you're so exhausted. I did that in New York for a little bit and just wasn't that successful at it because just making a living became such a hassle. So I'm a big proponent of until you are ready, stay where you are, have a less cost of living, a smaller cost of living, so you can really focus on your writing and get your writing to a point, then you can, make a move. I've spent the last 30 years between Texas and Los Angeles, and the first time I was out in LA, it was me making too much money, being way too drunk, and really self-destructive. And that was professionally, strangely enough, the high point of my career. But because of my behavior, I was eventually shown the door and went back to LA another time where I was just more anxious to start my career. And both those times I don't look at so fondly. They were like really rough times in LA personally. And then the third time I was out in LA, I found a community. I found, rather than having a bunch of drunk friends at the bar, I found a creative community within the improv community. So I was writing on this, writing on the side and doing improv on the side, and was teaching a little bit there. And now I look back on LA with a very different eye. So that's another bit of advice I give, is just find a community, finding people to go through this journey with that elevate you, make you better, that you can offer something to them, you can add value, they add value to you. It made a tremendous difference. And I'm back in Texas now, and I don't miss the day-to-day drudgery of LA, but I definitely miss my friends. I miss the community that I was a part of. In my early days, the bulk of the work I did, I was within the studio system as a writer. So I would sell a script to Warner Brothers, sell a script to MTV, to Disney. That was, like I said, that was when my career was at its highest as far as, making the most money. But I was a drunk, and I was difficult to work with, and argumentative. Basically, I look back on it now, I think I probably didn't struggle enough, and so I took it for granted. I was very fortunate that I, by some happy circumstance, managed to get an agent at CAA, write a script, sell it, and I didn't quite know what I was doing. So the scripts were hit and miss. One script would be good, one script wouldn't work out as well, another script would be really good, another script would, and it took a while to get more consistent. But I was also gaining a reputation of not being easy to work with. People weren't working with me twice. I made a lot of mistakes that way, and I ended up later getting sober, definitely having some questions about, how do I do this better? How do I get better at this job? How do I be a better human being? How do I be a better friend? How do I be a better son? Just that, a journey a lot of drunks go through. So when I got back into the business, it was important to me, through time, to change my reputation. Luckily and fortunately, I have. So I went from producers never wanting to work with me twice to working with the same producers over and over and over again, because I'm a good team member. And I'm also now very picky about the producers I work with as well. I don't want to work with producers twice that I don't enjoy. So what has writing taught me for the studios taught me about the business? Well, that it is a business. That's the key thing. It's definitely a business. It definitely teaches you not to get too attached to your creative work, which is, easier said than done. It's still heartbreaking if a project goes a different direction. It's particularly heartbreaking if it goes a different direction that doesn't work. Collaboration is a huge part of it. If you don't want to collaborate, write a novel. That you have total control of that. Because even a play you retain the rights to, but you still have to collaborate with actors and directors in the theater, and you'll have final say, but you want those people to make your play even better than what you wrote. That's the hope, is an actor comes in and breathes life into it, makes you look like a genius because of what they bring to it. The money is much better with the studio system, but the development is much tougher. The development is longer, harder, and the chances of success, which is, final production, are also a lot more slim. So I work in mostly the relatively independent part of the business now. We get distributed through the studios, but we're developing before it gets to the studios. And those tend to be a higher chance of success as far as getting it to the end, and I enjoy that. But it's just as likely you'll get fired. Sometimes you get fired, someone comes in, rewrites you, then they bring you back. So that's happened a lot. I've had 3 projects where I was off the project. They bring in other writers, and then they ask you to come back and rewrite the rewrites of you. That's not. I thought that was very uncommon when I started my career, and it has happened enough times now that I don't find it uncommon anymore. So I've had 8 movies made at this point, and I found them all creatively a disappointment, and so, I'm trying to be much more protective of my stuff now, because I would find it psychologically difficult to have a ninth disappointing movie at this point. But I remember there was one film called Dead in a Heartbeat, and it was this TV movie back in 2002, 2003, and we thought there was going to be a WGA strike. And so the studios and the networks were all trying to get as many projects as they could going. They were trying to get as much content as they could. And so they ended up greenlighting stuff that wasn't really ready to be greenlit. And the director asked me to come on and do a rewrite. And this film was unfilmable. Like, the script was unfilmable. It was really, really, really bad. And it wasn't ready to be shot. And if it wasn't for the strike that ended up not happening, but if it wasn't for the threat of that strike, this movie never would have got greenlit. So everyone knew that. We did a rewrite. And the cast was set. The sets were there, locations were set, like it was going. And so I ended up doing this rewrite that got this really unfilmable project that should not have been greenlit, and within a couple weeks' time got it to be a mediocre TV movie. Anyone watching this movie would be like, this is a mediocre TV movie. But me and the director, I know what we did to get it from why is anyone even making this to, oh, that's somewhat watchable. That was, to me, I still think about that as just like real pros work of just parachuting in, getting something to be somewhat decent, and no one's ever going to know. My credit on it is like a co-producer credit. I didn't get writing credit because all I did was rewrite scenes. I didn't change the structure. I didn't change the characters. The actors were already cast. I mean, the main actor sent me a bottle of champagne because he had such better dialogue now. He had scenes to play now. But anyone watching it would be like, why are you proud of this mediocre thing? And I was like, you didn't see the first draft. I came in and did that. I just recently put up 3 of my movie posters in my office. It's actually outside my office on the hall. So after, 30 years of these movies, I was always so unhappy with them that I was kind of, bitter about it. But I also know now just how hard it is to get a movie made. It is so hard. Every movie is a little miracle. The hope is to have another movie this year. We had a setback. I was hoping to have 2 movies this year, but we just had a setback yesterday where we lost the director. And it looks like that movie's going to, take at least another year on a good case scenario. So, this is the stuff that happens. It's 2 steps forward, 1 step back, or 1 step forward, 2 steps back. So those posters are up now as just proud that they just got made. I had a project that I wrote the first draft in 2009. It had a director back in 2012. We didn't get it set up. Had a producer. We didn't get set up. Got a producer in 2018, and then we finally got it set up, and Paul Schrader was going to direct it, and he was going to do a rewrite, and I waived my rewrite because in the WGA you have a right to be the first person to rewrite it, and I waived that for Paul Schrader because he's Paul Schrader. He's a legend. I don't mind him rewriting me. I'd be honored if he rewrote me. So I waived that rewrite, but then Paul left the project, and then they brought someone else in. But I didn't waive my rewrite for that person. I waived it for Paul. And so I was a little bitter that they didn't immediately go back to me and go, okay, since Paul's not going to do it, you're going to do it. And then it went through 4 years of rewrites. And then my agents emailed me and said, hey, the talent department at the agency got this today, and it was my script, but it was the rewrite of my script. And so I read the first few pages and I was just heartbroken because it was just so bad. It was just not, somewhere along the way, it had lost its way. And the draft that I was reading was nowhere near my draft was. It was nowhere near the draft that Paul Schrader wanted to direct. And it wasn't castable. Like, you weren't going to cast this. And I could read it and go, like, you're not going to get an actor who wants to do this part. Not at the budget you're dealing. You offer them $20 million, sure. But you're going to offer them $1 million, $2 million. Like, they're not going to do this for a paycheck. And so everyone reread the old draft. They hadn't read it in 4 years. And they were like, God, this draft is so much better than the current draft that we have. And so after 4 years of development, it went back to my original draft and is now going out to actors in my original. Not a word has changed from the draft that they purchased, even though it's been 4 years of development. They just scrapped those 4 years of development. And so, there's different ways to look at it, but and these are all smart people. Like, these are all smart, talented people. And development is hard. There's areas of friction. There's directors coming in, they have thoughts. This person has this thoughts. And then sometimes if you don't have that director or that producer or that one individual who is keeping, like the showrunner, like the TV showrunner, you've got a showrunner who is responsible for it all. And if you don't have that, or that's the wrong person, you have it, but if it's the wrong person, it's very hard to control where this thing goes. And if is it going to be better? And development is a skill in itself, and not enough people know how to do it. And the reason why I brought that up is because of those areas of friction. I get very defensive about when movies don't work, and people on the internet get like very judgmental of this piece of crap, or this writer wrote this movie, but they also wrote this movie, they also wrote this movie, and how terrible are they? And it's so difficult to know what went wrong and why. And if you are in a position to write 4 bad movies, you have to be an incredibly good writer to be in the position that you wrote 4 movies that got greenlit and got lost somewhere along the way. Because the script that they greenlit, or the script that like finally pushed it past, was not terrible. And that person got in that position because they wrote good stuff. So I get pretty defensive about people who don't know the business, who like to dunk on bad movies, because no one sets out to make a bad movie. Like, none of us at any time went, let's go make a bad movie. Sometimes you're just feeding the monster of content. Like TBS needs 2 hours, we'll create 2 hours for them, and you get the paycheck and you do that. But otherwise, you're doing your best, and things just go wrong for whatever reason. But that's what makes it, when it goes right, like so special and so unique. And then if you can get someone who can captain the ship and improve the odds of it going right, that's why those people make so much money. So what makes a great screenplay? It's not as hard as you would think. It is just great scenes and great characters. There's a third thing: great scenes, great characters, and the order by which you put those things. And so, like, that's all of it in a nutshell. I try not to write a screenplay until I have 5 great scenes, and I don't write a screenplay until I know this character journey of who they are at the beginning and who they are at the end, and why this character is compelling to watch. And then just experience and knowledge and gut instinct of, okay, how do I place these moments in a certain order that's going to maximize the emotional response and the narrative momentum that's going to keep the audience watching. But at the end of it, it's just great scenes and great characters. I definitely recommend, if you want to learn or get better at something, teach it. It is an amazing experience to teach something. For me, the 2 main things is it forces me to think of things differently. So as I learn new things, because I've been teaching so long, I instinctively think, how do I teach this? Like, how do I teach this to others? And you end up looking at it from a different way. But what that also ends up doing is it systemizes it. So you have things that you do naturally, which, for lack of a better word, we might call talent. That may show up any day, or it may not show up that day. Like, you may sit down to write and talent has decided to take the day off. You're still there. You're still there at the keyboard. Talent isn't. So by systemizing it and learning new things, you systemize it and turn it into a tool that you can have access to. And then at the same time, those things that you call talent, you have to explain it to somebody. And then when you explain it and break it down to somebody, that also systemizes it and turns it into a tool. And when I was younger, I thought it was the primary important. I thought talent was the primary driver of your success. But as I've gotten older, and like we talk about Edward was supremely talented. And you look at Tarantino, who's supremely talented. Tarantino sees the world through movies. Like, that's his filter. Like, he grew up watching movies, and he reinterprets those movies into new movies. And so that's how he thinks, and that's his talent, is how he processes this information. Olby just spiritually and ideologically viewed the world differently. And that was his talent. And he processed that information from through that filter. And to me, that's all talent is how quickly you process certain information. So everyone has a certain starting point of how they process this information. And it has a lot to do with how much you love movies. That's why Tarantino, who had been doing nothing but watching movies for 10, 15 years, of course he's going to process this information differently than someone who's like, I think I might like movies. Like, it's just two totally different experiences. And then he immerses himself into that, and now he starts to see it even more and more and more. So we all go into it at a starting point. And the mistake a lot of us make is that we judge our talent based on that starting point. But the starting point has a lot to do with how much have you been watching movies? How much have you been devoting yourself to TV? How much have you been thinking about it, writing about it, talking about it? All of that has to do with how you process this information. So you can get people who are processing it much faster than you are, but if you work at it longer and harder, you will start processing that information faster and faster and faster. And if they are not working as hard as you, you will absolutely pass them. And it will look like you're more talented than them, because no one's going to see how much work you put in. No one's going to see how much you've been writing, how much you've been pushing forth. One of my favorite quarterbacks in the NFL was Jeff George. And Jeff George was the #1 pick. And he had an attitude issue. And he never, he ran the run and shoot for the Atlanta Falcons and Jerry Glanville for a year and was lights out, because he was just perfect for that system. But him and Dan Marino had the prettiest throws. And someone asked Jeff George about who taught you how to throw, and he was like, no one, I've always been able to throw. But he also was, by reputation, a little on the lazier side. And so he wasn't breaking down film. He wasn't the gym rat. He wasn't the film rat that Tom Brady is. Tom Brady is, you can't, when he was playing, you couldn't get him out of the film room. He was constantly working. And so you get someone who is more talented as a passer, who doesn't work as hard. Someone who is was drafted 6th round, was not a big, but busted his butt and outworked his talent. Now, Tom Brady was not untalented by any means, but he worked himself into looking like the most talented person on the field. But the fact is that most people don't work that hard. And so if you start outworking them, you will get there. That's why I always feel like there's always going to be a spot for good stories, good scripts, and good writers. I know, for me as a teacher, when I have a student tell me that their biggest problem in their career is exposure, I know I can't teach them. Like I know, well, if they think they're ready and it's just the world is unfair is why they haven't blown up, then I know like what I can teach them is limited because they're not looking at what can I do better. If you're not looking at what can I do better, you're not going to grow. And if you're not going to grow, you're already set, you're already maxed out, you've already hit your ceiling. So like as soon as you think that's your problem, it's self-fulfilling. Well, it changes over time because I think in the 80s and 90s and even the 2000s, it depends on what you do. Like if you wanted to go into comedy, I would have recommended get to LA as quick as you can. Like the comedy community in LA was really developing great talent, pushing things forward. If you want to be a screenwriter, if you want to write features, stay where you are, keep writing. If you want to get into TV, stay where you are, keep writing, and then when you're ready, go out there. So right now, with the film industry, film and TV, kind of shrinking right now, and hopefully will be just a wave, a cycle. Hopefully it shrinks, expands, contracts, expands. But right now, with it contracting and with LA, the price of living in LA getting more and more insane, I would not move out to LA right now unless I wanted to get into live comedy or there was an opportunity to exploit. Because what ends up happening to a lot of people is you end up working 12, 14 hours. Like even like, hey, I got this great assistant job, but a Hollywood assistant works 12 hours a day for no pay and is too busy to write, is too busy to really exploit being there. So like you've got to figure out a way to negotiate that. For me, my advice is find your community, and that is like your hometown. It is very possible that the best resource you have are the other filmmakers in your hometown. Like that's very, very possible. You might be in a place where there are no other filmmakers, there are no other people like you, that there isn't a place to build community. And then you've got to go somewhere where that exists. Definitely my feeling is get good at what you're doing. The way you get good at what you're doing is by doing it. So writing screenplays, making short films, putting up plays, whatever it is, create. And then by creating, you're expanding your relationships. You're working with people, you're introducing your work to other people. I love meeting people whose work I like. I love enjoying an actor's performance and then reaching out to them and starting a dialogue and have them on my Rolodex in case something pops up. And writers, I like developing writers. Like creative people like other creative people. So if you create, you will not only create relationships with the people you create with, you'll get introduced to other people who create, you'll expand those relationships, and then you create more. That will create opportunities. But you have to have the time to do it. You have to have the resources to do it. And then at some point, you'll be in a position where you'll want to move to LA for TV, or features never move. Like I said, I've been switching back for 30 years between Texas and LA. And every time I was in Texas, there was always pressure from my agents to let me know when you're in town and we can set up some more meetings and we can kind of get things going. And there was always a little bit of frustration. But since COVID, not a peep. Everyone does meetings on video now. Like there's so little requirement to live in LA right now. If you've got the money, you've got the resources, and you want to do it, it's never going to hurt you to live there. But if you don't have those resources, it could be draining resources away from the thing that those resources need to go to, which is create, write, create, produce, direct, act, whatever that is. Again, there's such a vibrant comedy community in LA that if you're in your 20s and you don't mind being broke and you want to go do improv, learn how to write sketch, learn how to write sitcoms, there's definitely an avenue that's still there that I think is still alive, but it's the same price of like, are you going to have time to do it? Because you're going to have to work a lot. And I've seen a lot of people go to LA, and those, the restaurant jobs aren't as plentiful as they used to be. The economy's not so great in LA right now. But they would get a job at a restaurant, and they would work till 2:30 a.m., and they'd hang out with all the restaurant friends, and they would get drunk and have a great time, and that's what your 20s are for. But they would go home at 5 a.m., sleep until 2, start their shift at 4, and it just became this cycle. Because you work that hard, you want to hang, you want to drink, you want to hang out with your friends, you want to have fun, but then it just creates this cycle. And then all of a sudden, why did you move to LA? Because you're not doing it. You're not doing it. So I would look for opportunities in LA that might justify it, but just the days of packing your car and moving to LA and this is where I'm going and we're going to make a go of it, it just doesn't seem to be a smart move these days.